There is a moment that comes for every man over 60 who ever wore a red International Harvester cap, and the men who have lived through it never forget it. You walk into the shed before sunrise, and you put your hand on the hood of a Farmall that has been sitting in the same spot since your daddy parked it there, and you feel the cold steel under your palm, and you realize that the company whose name is stamped into the metal under your hand has been dead longer than your grown son has been alive. The tractor still works, the diesel still fires, the paint is still red, but the men who built it, the men whose hands shaped the iron and whose pride lived in every weld, those men are gone, and so is the world they built it in. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you are watching from. This is the story of how the most powerful tractor company in American history died on a Tuesday in January of 1985, and how the death of one company changed the way every farmer in this country has lived ever since. It is the story of what happens when a name that built America gets sold for parts, and why no matter what color tractor sits in your shed today, the company that built it is not the same kind of company that built the one your grandfather drove. There was a time when red was everywhere. There was a time when International Harvester was not just a brand, it was a way of being alive. Cyrus McCormick invented the mechanical reaper in 1834 in a blacksmith shop in Virginia. From that one machine grew a company that, by the early 1900s, employed 100,000 people and sold more tractors than anyone on Earth. The Farmall H sold 390,000 units between the late 1930s and the mid-1950s. There were towns in Iowa and Illinois and Indiana where every single farm had a red tractor in the shed, and the dealer down the road knew every farmer's name, and the company in Chicago knew every dealer. And the whole thing worked because everybody in the chain still treated everybody else like neighbors. There were 11,500 farm equipment dealers operating in this country in 1979, and most of them sold red iron. There were country songs written about that tractor. Craig Morgan recorded one in 2008 that older farmers can still sing along to without missing a word. And then it ended. It did not end slowly, the way most companies fade. It ended like a barn collapsing in a windstorm. In the summer of 1980, President Carter put a grain embargo on the Soviet Union, and farm income collapsed overnight, and interest rates climbed past 20%, and farmers stopped buying new equipment, and the men who ran International Harvester made one decision after another that turned a bad year into a catastrophe. The CEO, a man named Archie McCardle, picked a fight with the union that the company could not afford to win. The strike went on for 5 months, one of the longest in the history of American manufacturing. The factories sat silent, the dealers sat empty, the phones in the front offices rang, and nobody answered. And in 6 months, International Harvester lost $500 million. $500 million. At the time, it was one of the biggest corporate losses anyone had ever recorded. The debt climbed to $4.5 billion. 225 separate lenders had to sit down in a room together and agree not to pull the plug, and even then, everybody in the room knew that what they were doing was just buying time until the burial. The dealers saw it coming first. There was a man in Iowa who told the story years later in a magazine. He said a dairy farmer he had known for half his life came into his office one afternoon, shut the door behind him, sat down across the desk, and quietly told him that he had just declared bankruptcy. The two men had grown up in the same town. Their families went to the same church, and there they sat, across a desk in a feed store on a Tuesday afternoon, and the customer cried, and the dealer wrote later that he felt bad for himself, but he felt worse for his friend. That was the kind of small American moment that died with International Harvester. Then the suits came. In January of 1985, on a cold morning in Alberta, Canada, Two men from the Edmonton office and two men from Racine, Wisconsin, walked into a family-owned International Harvester dealership that had been in the Algott family for 3 generations, and they told Clarence Algott and his son Gary that they were out of business. Not next month, not next year, that day. 3 generations of work, 3 generations of customers, 3 generations of red iron sold and serviced and trusted, ended in a single morning by 4 men who had flown in from out of town and did not stay for lunch. There were tens of thousands of stories like that in every state, in every farm county in America. 11,500 dealers in 1979 became 5,800 by the end of 1985. Almost 6,000 dealerships erased in 5 years. Around 100,000 people lost their jobs in that consolidation, and most of them were red. Most of them were old IH dealers whose grandfathers had shaken hands with the McCormick family. There was a man named Larry Smith who ran a dealership called O'Neill's Farm Equipment in Binbrook, Ontario. When he heard that Tenneco had bought International Harvester's farm equipment division, he said 5 words that every dealer in North America understood. He said, "I felt like I lost my family." Not a job, not a contract, a family. That is what International Harvester was. That is what got buried in 1985. Tenneco paid $260 million in cash and another $170 million in stock, and they took the IH letters and they bolted them onto the side of Case's logo, and they called the new company Case IH. They kept the red paint. They kept some of the model numbers. They built one more tractor with International Harvester engineering still inside it, the 7100 Series Magnum, and the men who ran those tractors will tell you to this day that the 7100 was the last real one. After that, the engineering came from somewhere else. The Hinsdale Research Facility outside Chicago, where the IH engineers had been working on a mountain of new technology, was shut down, and the engineers scattered. The men who knew how to make a Farmall went into retirement or went into other lines of work. The tractor that came out of the factory after 1985 looked red and called itself Case IH, but it was not the same machine, and the men who had to work on it could tell. And then it got worse. In 1999, Case IH was sold to CNH, which is controlled by Fiat, and today, every red tractor sold under the International Harvester name belongs to a holding company called XER, which is owned by the Italian Agnelli family, the same family that owns Ferrari, the same family that owns Juventus soccer team. The little American flag stamped on the hood of your new Magnum is paint. The red of Cyrus McCormick's Reaper is paint. The company that built American farming for 150 years has been turned into a logo licensed by a boardroom in Italy that has never seen an Iowa cornfield in November. There is a forum somewhere on the internet where farmers and mechanics talk about which Case IH tractor was the best ever built, and the conversation always lands in the same place: the 7100 Series Magnum, the last one with IH in its blood. After that, the men who actually run these machines will tell you the truth that the sales brochures will not. One of them put it as plain as a man can. He said the drivetrain on the new ones is Rolls-Royce quality, but the rest of the tractor feels like the other half of it was built by Mickey Mouse. Hydraulic hoses you cannot reach without 3 hours and a creeper. Battery boxes located right where the dust and water collect. Built in Austria now, sold by an Italian holding company, designed by a committee that has never been on a farm at sunset. But here is the part that ought to put a knot in your throat. While International Harvester was bleeding out in 1981, an old farmer in Indiana could walk into his dealer with cash money and drive home a Farmall 1066 that was going to outlive him. 45 years later, that same 1066 is still working. There is one in a shed in Iowa right now, with 12,000 hours on it, that has never been opened up. There are International Harvester tractors built before 1984, selling at auction today for $19,000 when they sold new for $6,000. The 1466, the 1486, the 1586. The Farmall H is fetching more restored than it cost new in 1942, and there are men driving 4 states over to find a good one, because the iron that came out of the IH factories before they closed the doors is the iron that still works. The company died. The machines did not. In Lakenin, Missouri, there is a man named Bill Latchford, whose grandfather Leon left him a Farmall 460 that had spent most of its life on a manure spreader. Bill kept it, then he started collecting, then he started restoring, and now Bill has one of the most complete international harvester collections in the country, in 2 warehouses out behind his shop, and every piece of it is there because his grandfather loved a red tractor. There are clubs in every state, there are calendars and books and magazines still being published 40 years after the company died, because the men who grew up on those machines are not done remembering. In a barn in Illinois, on a Sunday in 1996, the members of the IH Collectors Club, Northern Illinois Chapter 2, spent 13 years restoring a 1953 IH Super M that had been left to rust in a field. The day they were finished, they handed the keys to a man named Max Armstrong, and that tractor has been pulling plows in parades and resting in Max's barn for the last 3 decades. This past summer, Max sold it. On the morning of the auction, this old broadcaster who has spent his whole life around farms put his hand on the steering wheel of his red tractor one more time, and he said something the reporters wrote down. He said, "I think of a very brisk fall night when Dad and I were rolling toward that house, and you could see the light on in the kitchen. Mom had supper for us ready. Those things just stay with you. That is what was lost. That is what no Italian holding company can ever put back. The light in the kitchen at the end of the field. The smell of supper on a cold November night. The certainty that the red tractor in the shed would still be there in the morning, and the man who built it was still alive somewhere, in a factory in Illinois, doing his job the same way his daddy had done it before him. That world was not just made of tractors. That world was made of people, and the people are gone, and the tractors are still here, and that is the inheritance that the men over 60 in this country are still trying to figure out how to pass down to the next generation. So tomorrow morning, when you walk out to the shed and the sun is just starting to come up over the back fence, take a long look at what is parked in there. The red tractor with the old IH letters on the hood, the one your daddy bought when you were a boy, the one with the cracked seat and the faded paint, that one belongs to you. The company that built it died a long time ago, but the iron is still warm under the hood and the diesel still catches on the first crank. And as long as you turn that key, International Harvester is still alive somewhere in the world. The corporations could kill the company, they could not kill the machine, and they could not kill the men who remember. If this hit you somewhere, hit subscribe and tell me one thing in the comments. What is the last red tractor your daddy ever drove?